What are the big issues on the minds of Houstonians today? Good evening, I'm Linda Laurel. Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. The answer to that question, as well as many others, is revealed in the newly released Houston area survey conducted by Dr. Stephen Klineberg of the Kinder Institute at Rice University. Now in its fourth decade and 33rd year, the annual Houston survey has tracked responses related to the economic, political, and demographic transformations of our community, as well as the life experiences, attitudes, and beliefs of Harris County residents. Some of the topics covered by this survey include education, crime, economics, immigration, gay rights, abortion rights, death penalty, and gun control. So tonight, we take a look at this year's results and what they mean for Houston. To help guide us through the survey is the author and surveyor himself, Dr. Stephen Klineberg, with the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice University. And as always, leading our discussion, our hosts, David Jones and Gary Polland.
Well, Dr. Klineberg, we've done this a number of times, and it's always a pleasure to have you here and talk about the survey. And what's fascinating about it to me is you've been doing this for decades. I guess you went to college originally when you were like 10 years old, because you're still a young man.
Well,
are you not bored?
It was a one-time survey.
Are you not bored with this?
I'm not bored. This is the most interesting city in America, and it's been fascinating to be able to watch the transformations occur.
And three big things that stand out.
The city went into major recession with the collapse of the oil boom in 1982, and then recovered by the end of the 80s, early 90s, into a restructured economy where the blue-collar jobs had disappeared, and a demographic revolution. Transformations occurring across all of America, nowhere more clearly seen and more sharply articulated than Houston.
So Houston is the future for America.
Houston is a place where the central challenges facing this country are most sharply articulated.
Okay, and the number one issue, the number one complaint, and I know it's going to be a shock, Linda, to all of our viewers. What's the number one complaint about Houston?
Random adult, random household. Thanks for helping us, people in the Houston area. Last 3 years, it's been the economy. Overwhelmingly today, it's traffic, right? And the economy is recovering. People are feeling much better about the economy. For the first time in 3 years, we asked people, how have you been doing financially the last couple of years? Things have been getting better, about the same or worse? No change for the last 3 years. This year, a significant change.
And the trend is also that people have decided that they would like to abandon their cars and get back to denser, more urbanized living.
That's here it is, the most automobile-dependent city in America, built by, for, and on behalf of the car, made possible by air conditioning. We're the most spread out, least dense major city. We built a civilization totally predicated on the automobile. And what's happened is not an increasing number so much as a absolutely clear, robust finding of about 50% of us say, I love the car and I want to live out in the suburbs and I want a big house. But 50% of us are now saying, I would prefer to live in a more urbanized home within walking distance of shops and workplaces. We asked the question that said, how should we spend taxpayer transportation monies? 50% said spend it to expand existing highways. 50% said spend it to improve rail and buses. So it's a different kind of
So white folks in the suburbs still want their roads improved, and then the inner city, which is where the cosmopolitan part of the city is, are interested in having other transportation options.
Yeah, there are. City folk are more likely to want more urban density than rural folk, but not that much difference, really. It's really we all went out to the suburbs in the 60s and 70s when 2/3 of all American families had children living at home. Today, less than a third of households have children at home. All bunches of us are empty nesters. The kids have grown up. Do I still want to commute for 2 hours every day? Do I want to? I work downtown. I love the ballet and the symphony. And then large numbers of young creatives who are postponing generation, not in any hurry to get married and have kids. And finally, the fastest growing segment of the population are people living alone. People living in single-family households. We think that by 2020, there will be as many households consisting of a single person living alone as households that have children.
Wow.
So not everyone's going to want to live in the suburbs
anymore. So interesting question on the issue of congestion. How does that factor that into the politics? Because the politics we've dealt with, as you know, Doctor, over the years has been, from my side of the table, Republicans, we're not going to raise taxes or fees, the gas tax doesn't go up, blah, blah, blah. That's the position, and because, I mean, people were tired of paying more and more in taxes. But now it looks like your survey indicates we're now at the precipice of a significant decision, because congestion's getting worse, which is a product of economic progress. At some point, it will impact economic progress adversely. So, do you think the survey reflects a change of attitude among voters that they're willing to make a decision whether they want to spend more money on gas tax or other fees to pay for the roads and mass transit that we're going to need to continue to grow, or they want congestion, or do they want toll roads everywhere?
It's a tremendous challenge because you have to make the investments now in light rail and buses for it to pay off down the road, but the front end costs are very large. So it's a tough challenge, but I think what's happening is, number one, we know that another 1 million people are going to be moving into Harris County.
Can you imagine our traffic with another 1 million people?
If we don't find a way to accommodate the interest on half of the people who say, I'd rather have some alternative to the car. And you can begin to see it starting to happen. So that you go to the suburbs because you can get a much bigger house, but you spend much more money on cars.
That's some people talking about the need for commuter rail.
Right.
Another issue that Gary could have thrown in but didn't was that the decline in the numbers of people, white, Hispanic, African American, who think that race relations in the city are good.
That was a very
everything's dropping. We have the most income segregated city. We can all brag about all of
Houston's the most
things.
segregated city in America by income.
That's
the sixth most segregated by ethnicity.
You know, I'm just wondering whether or not that is starting to, that there's a wear and tear in these other two lower income communities.
So this one of the central realities is that we are in the process of a fundamental transformation in the demographic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. Right, of all the people living in Harris County, Texas today, it's not until you reach people over the age of 60 that a majority are Anglos. At each younger age group, Anglos plummet, African Americans, of everybody in Harris County, Texas, under the age of 20, 51% are Latinos, 19% are African Americans, 8% are Asians, 22% are Anglos. So that's our future. This is who, and Houston's
But our
destiny,
tax base is the 22% who are over 60, you know, and I don't think that they've ever demonstrated an interest lately.
That's part of the great challenge.
To help all of these other.
Except we all understand that if Houston's going to have a viable future, we've got to make sure that these African American Latino kids are prepared to succeed in the knowledge economy.
Well, the Chronicle editorialized it recently, saying, you know, if we don't, our loss of state income over in the next few years is maybe up to $1 trillion.
My colleague Steve Murdoch, that we had on recently, that's just, I mean, the demographics are just so powerful. You know, no force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more Latino, more African American, more Asian.
Now, what I found interesting, because you talked about, David mentioned declining view of African Americans, Hispanics about race relations.
So we've been watching this.
But on the other hand, we find your survey shows increasing tolerance and acceptance of gay Houstonians, and significant changes over the years.
Immigrants.
And illegal immigrants. So how does that come together?
Okay,
we have more tolerance, but we have less, but people think they're not as a good shape. So how do you explain that?
So the question that David was asking was a question we've asked every year since 1992. How would you rate the relations that exist among ethnic groups in the Houston community? Excellent, good, fair, poor. All three communities have shown significant, continuing, increasingly positive ratings until this year, and in all three it dropped. So that's fascinating. It dropped in part, I think, because it reminds us that we're not going to automatically build a truly successful multi-ethnic society. This is going to take work. We are segregated cities, so we don't get to know each other well. So some of that is a reminder of the complexities of building this multi-ethnic world that will be Houston today and will be America in the 21st century.
Well, we also have a political system that really focuses presently, you know, for the most part, even nationally, but certainly in the state of Texas, on Republican white males bashing brown people. Yeah, I can't imagine that that's helpful to their impressions of what race relations are like.
You know, that's just David making no sense.
Apparently, you haven't seen the Dan Patrick commercials then, where he talks about diseased Hispanics coming across the border.
The interesting thing in that, though, is that Latino ratings of race relations went down after each of the major elections. In 1988, 2002, 2012, 2008, and 2004. And it went down significantly last year when it was going up in the other two. And I expected it to come back up, and it didn't. And I think some of it is how are race relations, how are ethnic relations, where you hear all this anti-immigrant rhetoric. whether Republican or Democrat, that just gives people this feeling that things are not smoothly.
But I think one of the problems we have, and I think people, when we talk about this issue, should be very clear that they're not anti-immigrant, because immigrant is what made America great. They may be anti-illegal immigrants, people who enter the country illegally and violate our laws, which means that basically our immigration laws are a joke. So that's the difference. David calls it anti-Brown. It's not anti-Brown. It's being anti-illegal immigration. You either believe in the rule of law or you don't. But I think what you point out is it's very important that people be very careful and clear what they talk about it, because broad brushes.
Not if they want to win a Republican primary, they don't have to be clear. They're being very clear.
But they do if they want to win the
election.
Right.
But then meanwhile, just to pick up on what you're saying, at the same time, there has been significant improving attitudes toward illegal immigrants. Over the years in ways that are really interesting.
Well, and I think what happens also is, for people you're surveying, is as things go on, people discover, you talk about better feelings about gay Houstonians.
Yes, also.
They discover they actually have friends that are gay, or their children have friends that are gay. So of course, then they said, well, I didn't like them, but then they said, but wait a minute, I really like her or him, so I have a different attitude. And same with the illegal, or illegal immigrants. They say, well, I got to meet him. Well, actually, I like him. There's a guy who does my lawn I like.
Exactly right.
And I like him. He's a good guy.
And we've had 30 years of being a city of immigrants. And so we're watching increasing recognition. These are people who are contributing to the economy and improving our update. And then the other point is that the big bulk of the immigration occurred until 2007. Every year since then, there have been fewer new immigrants. So my friend Dan Patrick, to the contrary notwithstanding, there is not an invasion going on now. There's much of the growth of Latinos and Asians in Houston is no longer new immigrants. It's a second and third generation.
Part of that is because the new leadership in Mexico is really creating a really good economy.
Doing better, exactly.
The economy is doing well, so if you can make money at home, why come?
Exactly, but it does mean that there's less fear of being overwhelmed by immigration.
And there's no jobs here anyway. So on the social issues, well, maybe in Texas, on the social issues, it seems like that whether it's all preferences for something other than the death penalty, alternative sentencing for people with small amounts of drugs. Gary mentions gay rights is a majority. Path to citizenship is okay. Why isn't this city being run by an overtly upfront liberal mayor and or county judge, especially since you found that it's close to being an even Republican-Democratic county?
Well, I think within the margin of error, it probably is pick 'em.
That's right. But what's important, and we've all been recognizing this every year, is that there's a difference between public opinion, which is what we are measuring, asking people in the privacy of their homes, how do you see the world, and politically effective opinion. Who votes? Latinos in Texas vote at half the rate of Latinos in California. Who controls the political apparatus? Who especially votes in the primaries? Who establishes the agenda? And that's a big difference. So ultimately in a democracy, the political attitudes will shift when things in that direction. But we've always known that the Democratic Party, the positions that the Democratic Party takes in general are closer to the general public's views than the positions that the Republican Party takes.
They just don't have anybody bold enough to say it.
But they get elected.
They don't have anybody to say it.
Do you have any explanation of why we don't have participation to the numbers we should? I mean, come on, we have both parties voted, 11% of the registered voters
Houston
in the primary?
Is notorious for the lowest voter turnout.
People complain. People complain about Democratic candidates or Democratic policy or Republican policy in the state. So why don't people go out and vote in the primary?
Well, Dan Patrick will help soon with the Latino turnout.
Houston is notorious, as I say, for the lowest voter turnout of any major city. We never paid much attention to politics. We want to be left alone by government, basically. We came down here to make money and to get a good job. And I think we've had a moribund Democratic Party for the last 20 years in many ways that has not tried to galvanize, as they have in California, their natural electorates. Education is one of the key predictors of whether you vote or not, and education is differentially distributed among Republicans and Democrats. So it's a bunch of things but it's going to be fascinating to watch as Houston and Texas become battleground areas, as they likely will.
And one of the things I find of interest is if you look at, you said, the Hispanic and African Americans both think race relations are going downhill.
Slightly, yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure.
What you find, what I see emerging in the city at least, is an Anglo-African American coalition there's one power base versus the Hispanics, because you put the Anglos and the African American votes together, you got close to a majority.
Right,
So interesting.
So what
Well,
kind
two
of,
people have tried that.
what
and
kind
it
of
failed.
coalitions will
Gene
fly?
Locke tried it. Benjamin Hall tried it. It didn't work.
Yeah, well, maybe the time's still coming.
Right.
But
so
there are all these shifting coalitions that are difficult to expect.
what did you get a sense about whether or not people are satisfied with public education? I mean, I don't. If there was such a question,
People are aware of how critical education has become. We asked a question last year that said, in today's economy, do you think it is necessary to get education beyond high school? Or are there many ways to succeed with no more than a high school diploma? 3/4 of all Houstonians said you've got to get education beyond high school. That's why I tell people the most important institution of higher education in this city is not Rice University, wonderful and important as Rice is, it's a community college system. That's where we take kids and connect them to the jobs. And what is striking there is that, I fight this losing battle with people who say, well, if only Latinos valued education the way the Asians do, we would have no problem. Well, it turns out that African Americans and Latinos, to a much greater degree than Asians and to a much greater degree than Anglos, say you've got to get education beyond high school. So they know how critical that is. The problem is not values, it's access to the education that increasingly requires parental support. It's why early childhood is going to be so important.
We have to make sure that these minority kids are educated. We also have to make sure, especially given the income disparities that you've identified, that they get health care, because a healthy kid is going to be a kid that learns.
Right.
And if you put those two together, they're going to be productive. So if we're going to ever be if we're going to continue to be a prosperous state, those things have to happen, which means we have to extend the Medicaid in order to reach that population, or else we're committing suicide.
Well, except if we go with David's solution, we've just committed economic suicide, and
Well,
that swallows the whole state budget.
Yeah.
That becomes the giant conundrum, because you have all these other things you want to spend money on, but suggested by your survey.
But that's the point. We've got to find a way to come together, to spend the kind of money that is critically necessary to spend it in the most effective possible ways, and to ensure that we don't commit financial suicide in that process. But we've got to make those investments.
Effective is the key word. I think that one of the problems with the spending is a lot of it is ineffective. One of the other things the survey I thought was just really fascinating is the consistent viewpoints on abortion. I just find that stunning, that issue, people are just frozen in place.
For 30 years, we've asked questions about abortion rights. Do you think homosexuality is morally acceptable, or I'm sorry, is abortion morally wrong or morally acceptable? Are you in favor of a law that would make it more difficult for a woman to obtain an abortion? Nothing changes, and it's been it's been this consistent sort of tolerant traditionalists, 60% who say I believe abortion is morally wrong, and 60% who say I'm against a law that would make it more difficult for a woman to obtain an abortion. That ability to say I believe it's wrong, but a woman has to make that decision herself. Every question on gay rights has shown a consistent, systematic, increasing support. So the question this year was, are you in favor or opposed to allowing homosexuals to legally adopt children? When we first asked that question in Harris County in 1991, 17% were in favor. And then it was 20%. And then it was 35%. And then it was 42%. And then 48%. And this year, 51%. So it's just striking. And what underlies it is two things. Number one is younger people are more supportive of gay rights, but no difference on abortion rights.
Interesting about that.
You mean younger people are not more supportive of abortion rights?
No, they are not. The single most powerful predictor of abortion attitudes is religiosity, and political parties.
And by the way, and your survey, of course, also reflects the changing mix of race and religious backgrounds in the city and age. So the fact that it's still consistent on this is just
very
fascinating.
Yes, that's right.
And once again,
So
Gary's crowd is on the wrong side of both issues.
Actually, your crowd's on the wrong side.
It's now 20 weeks and then abortion is over.
Loser issue for Wendy Davis.
These are tough
If you
issues,
even mention gay rights in a Republican primary, you lose.
The big difference is that two things are really different. One is we ask people, do you think homosexuality is something people choose or something they cannot change? An increasing proportion say it's something they cannot change. It's part of the natural human variation. So that changes the whole dynamic of what the issue is on gay rights. Abortion is not just a woman's freedom; it's also another human being, and so it's a much more complicated and difficult.
So do you get into religious preferences in the survey?
Sure.
Okay. Can you give us some idea about how many atheists there are?
Yeah. There has been a slight increase in the nuns, as they call them. But in general, about 1/3 of Houstonians are religious fundamentalists. Say the Bible is the actual word of God to be taken literally word for word. A little bit, almost about 40% are religious progressives who say religion is very important in my life, but the Bible was written by men and contains some human errors. And about 1/3 of us are secularists who say religion is only somewhat or not very important. And that turns out to be a powerful predictor across a range of issues and underlies a lot of the politics that we're talking about.
Well, you know, what occurs to me as you tell me that, because I missed that in the survey as well, is that, is to ask the question about whether or not you're talking about the region or the city whenever you give us these numbers. Because the first part of the survey talked about, you know, the differences between Fort Bend and Harris. Yeah. Then there was a map of the entire, you know.
Right, the 9-county region. So
I'm confused about who you're
in
counting.
The early years until 2012, so the first 30 years, it was just Harris County. And then we said, wait a minute, we're in the MCMR, a multi-centered metropolitan region. We're all part of this. So since then, we've been reaching a random sample of the entire 10-county area. But when we make comparisons to past years, we look just at Harris County. And then to finish your confusion, in this year's survey, we did an oversample to reach an additional 400 respondents from Fort Bend County. So we can make that comparison. We're hoping next year to do it with Montgomery County.
That's where the migration is to those two counties.
Where the big growth is.
Where the big growth
those
and
people are
very
leaving
different
Houston.
places.
Are they not? Are those not people leaving Houston to move to those two places?
Some leaving Houston, but mainly it's people moving into the county, into the suburbs from the get-go, instead of going through the city first and the next generation. So it's and it's growing everywhere, right? And I tell my friends who are building out in the countryside, people are going to want to move there too. It's going to be that 1 million people into Harris County are going to go everywhere.
Right.
And we need to find a way to accommodate the different interests that people have as we. And I tell people also, you know, if we insist that all next 1 million people coming here all have to drive their cars everywhere, as you were saying, it can be all the remaining green spaces of Harris County will be turned into subdivisions and parking lots, and traffic will get worse and worse. And with it, Houston's ability to position itself for prosperity, because it needs to turn itself into a place that can attract the best and the brightest people in America who can live anywhere. And Houston is in the process of reinventing itself with the Bayou Greenway initiatives, with cleaning the air, with a commitment to making this a more beautiful place. Can we, when we have another 1 million people in Harris County, have a more beautiful, greener, healthier, more attractive environment?
Do you get the feeling, and because you do the survey every year and you make presentations to public officials and planners and the like, do you think they got their eyes open of the freight train headed toward our region?
Maybe not quite.
I think Mayor Parker does.
There's a growing understanding. I mean, the reality is so powerful.
You just said, as you pointed out, but it's also, it's not just.
But it's tough to know what to do about it.
Well, it's not just traffic. It's water. It's wastewater. It's utilities. It's everything. Do we really think that we have a plan between the private and public sector to deal with the next 20 or 25 years?
And can we develop a plan that is not zoning, that's not pointing at people telling you what you're supposed to, but that provides a vision of what Houston can be? About if we want high rise, what's the best place to put it? And the answer is somewhere within access to transit.
Major thoroughfares.
Or major thoroughfares, but not on a small.
You also polled on term limits, and I thought that was interesting, because if we are going to have any success at this planning that we have to see, then we're going to have people in office maybe who care enough about it to stick around for a while.
Yes, and beyond a 2-year horizon of
and I thought it was a 49-49 breakdown as far as supporting other.
So we asked two questions. One is, and this is just the city of Houston folks, are you in favor of continuing the term limits? Yes, 70% across the board. Then we said, well, of those who said they favor the term, should it remain as it is with 3 2-year terms, or should we change to 2 4-year terms? Always before, it was 55 to 30 or so saying, keep it the way it is. This year it's a 50-50 split.
Interesting.
And with no one sort of offering any efforts to educate people, the public is more ready now, I think, than it's.
Well, and maybe they're just realizing that, as David said, 2 years is a real short-term horizon for a councilman. You really don't.
It's time to have a ballot proposition that will change.
So the surveys indicate there's a more openness to this than we've ever seen.
Once you're in office, what time you're in office, and kind of figure out what's going on, you're already running for re-election. It is really interesting. Well, maybe there will be a referendum, and maybe there is a time for change on that, David.
Right. Well, we'll get your support for it, and I remember that.
technical
days.
pass,
I remember
you
the
know?
days when we had Greenwood and Tinsley, and we had people who were
Oh,
interested
of course, yeah, and they were there because they cared
You
about
want
the city
people
and
with a
everything.
longer term view.
Yes.
Very important.
exactly
Well,
right. Yeah.
Dr. Klineberg, as always, a fascinating report, and we commend it to everyone. Linda, we learn a lot every time the doctor comes.
So important for us to know all this information. Thank you so much, Dr. Klineberg. And remember, you can catch Red, White, and Blue every Friday at 7:30 p.m. right here on Channel 8, and again Saturdays at 6:30 p.m. We also invite you to visit us online and send us your comments. We want to hear what you are saying about the issues that affect Houston. You can submit your comments at houstonpublicmedia.org or on Facebook. And while you're there, don't forget to like us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Good night.